In this presentation, I pose to myself the question, and therefore to anyone who listens and would care to participate, does Plato contain within himself the possibility of housing all future thought? Such a proposition will remain intolerably opaque without a specific example, and the more essential the example is to human life, the better. The example I give is the education of the guardians in the I want to say in the Politeia. I think it could be pronounced in another way, but we could say in the polity, to use the English expression. The basic scheme of the education is to direct the future guardians towards the Kalon, where it is necessary, just as if we say, here is a seasoned green. So here we have I'm not sure if I can zoom in. Here we have a nice seasoned green on juniper tree. It must be quite old juniper, though it's small. If I were to say, what about a young, fresh green? It implies that I know the essence of green. In the same way, if I am to give a model to the students of the Kalon, I have to know the essence of Kalon. This seems to be something that is like the image of the God has arrived at by Jesuit metaphysics, which is to say neither a perfection which is neither of something spatial, neither of something temporal, but somehow another perfection. It stands in a different realm, and then it reaches out, and then we give it an example, and we say, yes, it's touching that example. So, for instance, in Sappho, we have the Kalon is given an example in the image of ships in a dock of military Kalon. It's also given, of course, by Sappho herself as the image of a lover. I'm not sure if Sappho makes this strict distinction between the lover and the beloved, in the sense that to be the beloved is to be the lover is to have a lack, and then to be drawn towards with a motive force towards the lover, who is in that sense has something that the one lacking has a hunger for. One can also see this in the sense of the education of the those who would not just have a general education, but would have something more, would have an education towards the Kalon. That's the point. There's a general education of the citizens, but then there's something more, and this is what we call also morality in the Christian context. So then you could see that with respect to actions that have a just character. So for instance, we had visit us at the Bold Law School sometimes. In general, sometimes we have these guys from the court that's supposed to be the second most powerful court in the country. So in the law school, they always like to present the legal sphere as the most important sphere in existence, and then the SCOTUS is the most important. The Supreme Court of the United States is supposed to be the most important, partially because of what they say is these people are appointed for life, and therefore, and they can affect the land for life, the country for life. And then there's the second most important court, the DC Federal Appeals Court, and then the people from there sometimes go about giving lectures at various universities. Merrick Garland, Griffith. So this guy Griffith came and gave it. This conservative guy Griffith came and gave a lecture to the Federal Society, and then he talked somewhat about what he called profiles of courage. So I think profiles of courage is sort of like the Calon. It's like there are certain things you could do. They might be bad for your what's absolutely necessary to you for your career, but you do them because of a sense that there's a God. Therefore, in this sense, I take this to mean the God of the cult of the capital, as the Romans would call it. Capital spelled with an O, and with the and this is why these jurists will say, yes, we believe in God. In order to say, we're part of this guardian class, we're going to do the things that are just, even if they harm the necessary things, meaning our career, meaning our even our family, if our career is harmed and our livelihood is harmed and our family is harmed, but nonetheless these things are, the Calon things are more important, the just acts are more important. So in this sense, we can see there's this notion of the Calon, and then we can ask, how does this orient towards any form of thinking? Then suppose we have the thinking of Dugin, of Nietzsche, of Zizek, whoever is the most powerful thinker currently. Guiding souls is the old way of putting it would be, but currently probably a better way to put that would be the current intellectual authority. Most people would say the greatest intellectual authority currently is physics, hard science, but that's not necessarily the case. So one could investigate into that and ask on other, maybe it's true what they say at the law school, that Sokrates is the most powerful authority and the greatest power in the world, because America is the greatest power in the world, 800 military bases, determining the politics of Russia and China, controlling 70% of global GDP through its formal treaty signatures, and who basically fall in line with American policy. And therefore, one could say SCOTUS is the most powerful entity that there's ever been, and that there's some sense to the boast, as it were, to what the American lawyers boast themselves to be as, in certain sense, say Richard Epstein, for instance, in certain sense he offers advice to SCOTUS judges about how they should settle their cases. They may not listen. But the point being, when they were younger, they were formed by such people, such jurists in the law school side, law school professors. Once they're adults, they probably won't. They're hardened and seldom listen. But since we have these basic forms, such as the notion of the move from general education to morality, which in Platonic terms is the move from general education to the Calon, to educational formation by being shown the Calon things, the beautiful or noble things, beautiful and noble being indiscriminately overlapping and only given by examples set first, and not theoretically distinguished by Platon himself, by Socrates himself, remembering that Platon and Socrates are substantially the same. We can't easily distinguish them. They're totally, utterly intermixed in our, to such an extent that even the greatest classical scholars, Leo Strauss, for instance, cannot, who have studied all the text around this, all the Athenian dramatists, Aristophanes, Xenophon's histories, his accounts of Socrates, all the materials that he can get, but it still says we can't really distinguish these two figures, Platon and Socrates. It seems to me any thinking, so again, Dugin, Zizek, whoever's in power can be brought into coordination with the basic discussions in Platon or Socrates. And it's difficult to say that they can't, and in Nietzsche also, so that we have this wonderful dramatization by the German philosopher, how's he called? Winkelschied? Sorry, I can't remember his name, but there's a dramatization, Plato and Nietzsche in discussion, on contemporaries in discussion, showing that there's, in fact, a great link here. So remembering Nietzsche said Plato is boring, but Nietzsche has maintained the link to Plato. And Heidegger has maintained the link to Plato by maintaining that our best chance at doing Seinfrage investigation is to look at the history which has formed us, and that means looking at all the essential points in our Western intellectual development. That's the best material that we can use to try to find out whether this notion that the human being is essentially a rational creature, a thinking creature that has a hunger for perfection, is viable, is continuing to be viable. That's the project of deconstruction in its full sense, asking whether these concepts are still viable, and the greatest of the concepts seems to have its center in Platon, Socrates. Leo Strauss says this is the beginning of political philosophy. It's, of course, has the support of the pre-Socratics or Platonics, but it seems to me this question then, in the future, I'm going to become more technically extremely nuanced in dealing with these metaphysical issues, because we have to show that just like a question like this is a question of whether it's still viable, we also have to show whether the questions, so for instance, between Russell and the Catholic theologian over whether we can define God the way the Catholics define God, which relies on the specific notion of existence and God having his essence as existence, as Heidegger defines Dasein, exactly what that means and exactly how to. We need a straightforward look at those questions, also, which requires extremely subtle questions be brought out in a direct way, so that we can ask how they still, what they still say to us. In other words, so we can deconstruct them.